Hey everybody, my name is Danny Dumas, and this is the Earn Your Title podcast. I am so excited to have my friend Mary Irwin here. Mary, Dr. Irwin, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, and then I'll tell you why I wanted you to have, why I wanted you to be on my podcast.
Okay, so I'm Mary Irwin. I have a PhD in pharmacology and cancer biology, and I've done a lot of work in cancer research and other things, but I also have two young kids at home, 8 and 4, who light of my life. And just trying to understand the world that we live in and help other people understand it as best as I can, since I've been lucky enough to have, some education in science and things like that. And just providing whatever help I can so that people don't live in fear.
Gotcha. And that is actually why I wanted you on here. I've actually been thinking about having you on the show for a while because I appreciate what you do. But there was a Facebook interaction that I saw, and I don't actually remember what it was, but the gist of it was someone said something like, did you know that, I don't know, Twizzlers are only one molecule away from being plastic? It wasn't that, but it was something like that. And you said, well, yeah, but one molecule matters. And I think a lot of people come from a lack of understanding and maybe the scientific process, a lack of understanding of what it means, the science behind it, and then maybe a lack of understanding of who our scientists are that are making sure that our drugs are safe, that our food is safe. You, by far, are the most educated person I've had on my podcast. You went to one of the greatest universities in the world, right? And why don't you share just a brief moment, why do you think it's important to understand the scientific process and why we can eat Twizzlers even though they're only one molecule away from plastic? Share that with me.
So I think people have a big misunderstanding of science in general. We get, an education in science at a young age, but it can be hard to understand sometimes and hard to remember, especially as we get older. Right. And having that, having somebody in your life that might understand it a little bit better than you, I think is something that's a great, example for all of us. I don't understand some things, other people do, so I go to them for help. Right. It's the same thing with science. We don't all understand things to a very deep level. Right. And other people do. And relying on those people in that community, I think is a big thing. Just for everything in life, but also, for science. When it comes to one molecule, the thing I like to say, which, some people understand, other people don't, but it's methanol is antifreeze, right? Ethanol, which is one molecule from methanol, is Chardonnay. So lots of people drink Chardonnay. I don't think anybody would really want to drink antifreeze. Right. So one molecule in science really matters, and it really makes a difference between what something's, okay for you, or, and what something would be really, really terrible if you put in your body. And it's all about how your body takes care of it and all about how your body, processes it and things like that. Something we like to say in the toxicity side, things are toxic. The dose makes the poison. So right. If you have, just a little bit of something, probably not going to hurt you. Right. If you have a whole bunch over a period of time, it could. Right. Even water. Right. So I think understanding those little ins and outs is really helpful to understanding our world and understanding, what is the actual factual information that means this is bad for you. A false equivalency to plastic doesn't really give you an understanding of what is it actually bad. Right. So, a lot of people, especially on social media, like to do those false equivalencies where they're saying this is equivalent to this because it's so close. Right. Margarine is so close to plastic, so it's you shouldn't eat it. Right. But that's not really the base understanding of it. And right. If you look deeper, you can get the facts about it. The fear of that goes away. A lot of social media is to promote a reaction, right? Clickbait, to get those, make people afraid almost.
Right.
And I think that's really something that I would like to avoid in my life. I don't want to be afraid. God tells us not to be afraid, right?
Right.
Fear is not of God, right?
Right.
So why would we ever, let that make us that way? No, let's look at deeper, and having people in your life that understand it. I mean, that could be really helpful.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
like to help my friends and family whenever I can,
Right.
because God put me in this position that I'm in. So, if I have questions about the things, I go to the experts.
Let me ask you, maybe you have some questions for us. Not everybody has you in their life, and I'm very thankful.
True.
I've reached out personally to you, like, hey, we're worried about, you're raising kids and vaccines, you're doing this and that. For someone that doesn't have a doctor in their life like you, what is maybe a thought process when you hear something online? For instance, me and my wife were just having a conversation about rice. We eat rice multiple times a week, and I was like, yeah, I just heard this thing that you're not supposed to have rice last more than a day. Like, after you cook it, you shouldn't eat it after that. And she's like, well, I heard that's fine, but if it's not in, as long as it's refrigerated, it's not a big deal. What is a good way to go, like a thought experiment or a process to go through, to does this information make sense? Is it logical? Maybe walk us through your thoughts when you hear something and go, maybe it's something that you don't even necessarily are an expert in, but what is a good thought process of how should I think about new information, whether it's true or false, and how do I come to a correct conclusion?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is question everything. If something feels weird or feels like new information, say, okay, is that true? Most of them won't have a citation. So a citation is has a link or information to dig deeper, right? So in science, we're all about, what are the citations? What is the backup data? So the first thing I do is I go to Google, and a lot of people have problems with Google because they'll look at the first hit on Google and say, what does that say? There's a lot of misinformation. So digging through that, the things that you need to look for, I would say, would be reputable sources, right? Look for something that is a publication in a science journal, or from people who are medical doctors or PhDs in science, and try to see what they say about it.
Right.
Now, even then, you have to be careful, because there are people who have medical degrees who kind of lean towards the side of misinformation, and trying to dig through that. I mean, it can be hard. It can be hard for me. So trying to get multiple sources that say the same thing. More than one person is saying this that has a reputable degree. If I see something from a person I've never heard of before, I'll search that person and I'll say, okay, is there any information on this person, and does this person have a reasonable background? Because if they're talking about something they absolutely know nothing about, maybe their opinion isn't as heavy as what somebody else might say, who has a background, in that specific field. And try to weigh those people against each other. But I think the biggest thing is don't take anything at face value, right? All of the images and the stories that we read have bias towards them.
Right.
Even a scientist is going to put a little bit of bias in their paper, right? Because they want their paper to be seen as the best thing ever.
Right.
So you kind of have to dig down and say, what's the information behind it? And ask questions, of those people. And I think holding people to account, I mean, that's a huge thing, but actually looking in step by step and saying, okay, is this just from a blog?
Right. Is this someone's opinion based on feeling?
Now, do they reference any other sources from that blog? Because a blog can be very well referenced and have a lot of very good information, or it can have a lot of misinformation. And see what physicians are saying, see what scientists are saying about these people. Because if a bunch of people are saying, hey, this person might be biased in a negative way, then maybe you don't want to listen to them. And another thing I've noticed, just searching through the internet for things like these, if somebody's trying to sell you something on their website, maybe question if what they're telling you is true or trying to sell you something.
Right.
You can kind of get a good feel for who might be a reputable source and who might not be so trustworthy. I mean, not everybody who sells something is not trustworthy,
Right.
honestly, but there's bias there. And there's bias because they want you to move towards their product. Mm-hmm. And understanding that that exists can help you really decipher what might be good information and what might be bad.
That's excellent. Yeah. I follow a guy, Andrew Huberman. I don't know if you're familiar with the Huberman Labs podcast, but what I really appreciate, he does sell products, and he will say, I sell this on my website, but the reason I sell this is because there's peer-reviewed research, and he posted. These are the 7 articles that says, ashwagandha is a good herbal supplement for this, this, and this. And then he kind of lets you decide, like, is that valid? Like, and I think you should be looking for clarity and honesty and open. Like, hey, especially I am selling something. You should definitely know that. Let's go into the science in general, or scientists in general. I've got some friends. They are definitely conspiracy theorists. Like, they are worried about big pharma and like the whole. They're just trying to make money. Like they feel like we've cured cancer 50 years ago, and we're not. Scientists aren't releasing it because if they did, then we wouldn't have all these really expensive cancer treatments. But I think what those people are failing to do are to see the scientists as human beings. Even a big company that sells medicine is a group of human beings that for the most part are not evil, right? We have a connection with your father who died of a disease, right? I guarantee if you had the cure for that, there's nothing on earth that you wouldn't do to push that and make sure that the public got it. So maybe you could speak to like just a group, like scientists as a group, and why you should believe them, because they're normal people that just happen to have spent a good amount of time in school. So maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a scientist. I worked in a laboratory for over a decade before I moved on to my current position. And it's one of those things, every day we're going to work and working our hardest to try to make an impact. And we're just individual people who have had the benefit of a great education, the privilege in some cases to have the opportunities to open those doors for us, and understanding. Some people say, I hope you understand that this is your gift. I do see it as a gift. It's a gift from God to understand these particular things and have the opportunity to do that. But as a person, I mean, we were moms. In the lab I was in, it was mostly women, and we were working really hard. We were, parents. We were somebody's daughter. We were all, I think, we all were Christian in that lab, and we all believe in God, and we all go to church on Sunday and have our church family, but we're just a normal person just trying to make an impact. Now, I understand the black box that big pharma can bring. Pharmaceutical companies are out there to make money. That is their ultimate goal, right? But the people that are working in those situations, they're just like you and me. Right. They're trying to make an impact. Now, pharma can, cancel things. Maybe there's not enough of a benefit for them financially, so they don't work on it anymore. But you can bet your butt, if you're in an academic lab trying to understand a cure for cancer, and you found that a cure for a certain type of cancer, because cancer is not one disease, it's very many, that you would not be able to silence that person, period. In fact, people would celebrate that person. Yeah. There's somebody at MD Anderson, his name is Jim Allison, and he has gotten these huge awards, Nobel Prize winning, for some of the findings that he found, because he co-opted the immune system to attack cancer cells. Now, there's not a ton of money in that, the thought of that, right? Taking your own immune system to attack cancer. Yeah, there's going to be some money in creating it and how to make it work and everything. But his finding was praised across the world because it revolutionized the thought of how you could treat cancers. And that kind of academic, praise and awards after awards after awards. That's how academics look at it, right? They're like, I can get my name out there if I find one treatment that works.
Right.
There's a drug in CML, so chronic myeloid leukemia. It cures 96% or something like that, 95% of chronic myeloid leukemias, but it doesn't work on other cancers. So I think that's part of the misunderstanding with things like cancer treatments. Right. If we had a cure for every type of cancer, it would be out there. You wouldn't be able to silence the conspiracy to silence people would have to be like the biggest conspiracy in the world, because I have family that died from cancer. Right. Everybody in my lab had family that died from cancer. We were all working on it in part because we had that personal connection. And the first thing I tell people is, I want to put myself out of a job. When I was researching in the lab, I want to put myself out of a job because I want there to be no cancer. Right. I that would be an amazing thing. Unfortunately, a lot of cancer therapies fail. So we look at resistance to these therapies and try to understand them. But you would have to silence so many people to hide a single cure for a single type of cancer. And we've cured many types of cancer. Right. It's just there's so many and it's so varied that people don't quite understand that. And that's getting back to the basic biology of things, right? There's not one type of cancer. We don't have a cure for cancer because there's so many different types. Right. We have many cures for many different types of cancer, all the way from surgery to drugs. Right. So just having an understanding that, okay, this is maybe bigger than what I initially thought it might be. Like a single cure for all cancers. That would be amazing. Yeah. You would never be able to silence the person who figured that out. You'd have whistleblowers left and right in pharma. You'd have people going to the government and saying, look, pharma's covering this up. It's a miraculous cure. We could do all these things. People would not be silenced. I can guarantee you that. Scientists like to be recognized for the work they do, sure, whenever possible. Right. But again, we're all just doing our best to do our jobs and to apply the knowledge that we have and the understanding and the education that we have to try to solve problems. And that's what it is in the baseline. I think we all try to do that in our lives. We use whatever gifts, whatever experience, whatever education we have to work on a specific subset of problems, whether they be a firefighter fighting fires, or somebody managing in a grocery store, or a mechanic or a scientist. We're all just trying to apply the knowledge we have to do our best and to make the world a better place in some way. Right. And with scientists, our way is, okay, we're going to try to understand how things work so that we can maybe use something to make it better.
That's awesome. What are you excited about? What's the next thing? Like, man, I see where science is going and research, and what gets you up in the morning? Like, I am excited about this next thing. What is that? The thing that I just recently read a book, Peter Attia talked about Medicine 3.0, where all the treatment is for you individually. So what are you excited about? Like, where do you see science going with medicine and all that?
So in terms of, when I was working in the lab, I'll say it was grueling. I was there 7 days a week sometimes. And what got me up was, the next thing, right? I can make a discovery, maybe something that's nobody's ever seen before. And then, okay, so what's next? And part of that is with science, it's ever evolving, right? You learn new things every day. Even if what you do fails, you've learned something. And that constant pursuit of knowledge and the constant pursuit of understanding how the world works and how our bodies work and how cancer works, in the case of what I was doing, really was a driving force for me. These days it's how can I impact public health? How can I impact other people with what I do every day? And it can be difficult. But trying to make that impact on people a little bit more directly in my current life, but then previously, how can I understand things better so that we can intervene if we need to in order to make a better treatment or find a way to get rid of the resistance to treatment or things like that. And it kept me going when I was there 7 days a week, sometimes at like 4 o'clock in the morning, because I had a 12-hour time point on something. I had to be there 4 o'clock in the afternoon and then 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever timing it was. Just that constant discovery and learning something new. And that excited me, right? I would be in the dark room developing some film on something and see my little, splotches on a piece of film. And I would say, nobody has ever seen that before. That was the first time anybody's seen this that I know of. And that was like huge, because we ask questions and we can get answers that maybe nobody's ever thought of before. Maybe a new direction that somebody just hasn't thought about, putting these two things together to kind of move in this way. And I think that was what really excited me for science in the first place, right? Finding out something new and understanding the systems that God put in place, and how they work and how we can help with drugs that have been produced or with natural, occurring chemicals that we can make them maybe a little bit better and to work in our system a little bit better, or concentrate them so that we can really pack a punch. Things like that were really exciting. But yeah, they do take a toll.
Sure. So I have, if you're okay with this, I'm going to ask some questions. And you just say, I'm worried about it, I'm not worried about it, or I need some more information. So I kind of asked a few people. So I would say in general, like me personally, like I'm under I don't care. Like aluminum in your deodorant. Do you care? Is it worrisome?
I'm not really worried about it.
So it's going to be questions like that. Are you ready? So I'm worried about it, I don't worry about it, or maybe there's more than you can say with just yes or no. All right. Let me get these out here. All right. The first one, arsenic and apple seeds. Should I stop eating apples?
I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay. Aluminum and deodorant, not a big thing?
Yeah, no.
What about storing food in plastic or styrofoam for like the PFAS and all that?
So that's a little bit more detailed than a yes/no question.
Okay. All right, that's fair. I would say, do you do that?
I do. I have, I put them in Ziploc bags. I put them in, containers and everything. I think we're working really hard to understand what comes out of the plastics in general, as scientists. And so I wouldn't necessarily heat them in that. If you can put them in glass or on a plate.
That was my next question.
But keeping them in your fridge, you're probably fine.
Okay. So the next one was heating in plastic, so don't do that. What about fluoride in our municipal water?
That I'm not worried about.
Gotcha. Fluoride in general.
I can give a little bit more detail.
Okay, yeah.
With fluoride, the only time they add it to the water is if there tends to be less than there needs to be, because your body does need some.
Gotcha.
It's good for you in some amounts. You don't want like drastically huge amounts.
Right.
You don't want to swallow all your toothpaste. But in some areas, there's very low amounts, and they do need to supplement.
So what you're saying is fluoride is a naturally occurring substance in water.
Yeah, I mean, you do get some of it naturally. So I think it's one of those things in the areas where there's a really, really low level, they might add a little bit.
Gotcha.
To try to bring it up to a normal amount. That typically doesn't, I don't think that occurs a lot in this general area. I think that's more overseas, but I'd have to look into that to be 100% sure. But generally speaking, there's some naturally, you need a little bit. You don't want to get huge amounts, but you don't want to have a deficiency either.
That's fair. All right. What about eating genetically modified organisms, GMOs? Are you worried?
Absolutely not worried about it.
Gotcha. That's definitive. Why? Absolutely. Because what's your take on it? I have a take, but I'm not a scientist. Go for it.
So for GMOs, so a lot of crops are not GMO, and you'll see like the non-GMO label because they're trying to fool you, for one. They're trying to say, hey, this is a marketing ploy. Yeah. So this is a marketing ploy. In most cases, there's only like a handful of crops that are actually GMO. And in the case of those, the GMOs are not any nutritionally different for you than a non-GMO. There's been studies that have shown that nutritionally they're exactly the same. The only difference is maybe they're blight resistant, or they create something that keeps more pests away. Why? Because then they use less pesticides. They don't have to use as much. And there's a huge, huge thing. People are like, oh, non-GMOs don't use pesticides. Absolutely not. Non-GMOs use tons of pesticides. Organic has specific pesticides that are used. Those are all things that are, misnomers. They're misinformation. And some of those organic pesticides are worse for your body than the ones that are non-organic. So it's one of those things that there's no nutritional difference. Don't need to worry about it. In fact, there's been times where I see 2 cans of something. One has the non-GMO label, the other doesn't. Right. I know it's not a GMO crop, so I'm not going to buy the one that's non-GMO, right, because don't spend it's literally just marketing.
It'd be like saying it's non-GMO water. Of course it is. It's all water is non-genetically modified. Exactly. All right, cool. That's good to know. All right, what do you think about eating or drinking foods that were given antibiotics? So milk or beef that was given antibiotics. There's a concern there.
I think I'm not worried about those. Let's see. Pardon me. There's a lot of misconception that these animals are pumped full of antibiotics and things like that, and they're not. Typically, there's some really good creators out there. I think one's called Farm Babe that gets into kind of those misconceptions, and it's not worrisome.
Oh, great. What about red dye or other food additives, things that are added to food that make it colorful or change the process or the thickness or whatever additives to food?
So I think it depends on the additive. So in some cases, there may be some connections with behavioral issues. In other cases, it's really just overblown. A lot of people are like, oh, they're banned in Europe and not in the US. That's not true. They're just named differently. There's just little things like that. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. I think generally speaking, if it's something that's allowed in our food in the US, you can bet the amount that it's allowed is something that's not going to be toxic to you, and it's probably going to be 100-fold or 1,000-fold less than what would be toxic to you. So you'd have to eat a ton to even have ever an issue. So I'm not too worried. I think as each new one comes out, we need to look at each new one carefully before we can say for sure. But we do understand more as time goes on. So some may disappear because of that. But typically, there's not really big issues.
Would you say that in the United States that our food, the process of approving food, is a well-regulated, well-thought-out process of like, hey, if we can't, like you said, if we can put it in there and it might be toxic times 1,000, that it is okay. You think that is a good system the way we have right now?
Yeah, I think we have one of the biggest programs in the world for regulating our marketplace and what goes on to our marketplace. And I have a lot of confidence in the people who do the work. I know some of them. I think they're amazing scientists. And just like you or I, they have families, they have friends, they have people that they don't want to see sick. And I think there's a lot of misconception that they're just rubber stamping this stuff through. No, it takes a lot of hard work and effort before anything gets allowed, especially when it's new. And second looks are taken all the time. They may take time for the information to come out, but if new information becomes available, people are looking at it and taking a hard look, and they're some of the best scientists I've ever known in my life. So
that's how. So there's a local potato chip manufacturer here in Michigan. It's a smaller one, probably not the one you're thinking of. And there was these chips my wife loved, and we would get them all the time. Then we stopped for like a year. We got them again, and they were different. And the oil that they used was banned. They got rid of the oil, and they were not as good. They were not as like creamy is not the right word, but like they weren't as good. So they're doing it, right? They're adjusting.
Yeah, I think I know what potato chip you're talking about because I felt the same way.
Yeah, it's devastating.
It was one I always had to have when I came home.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was new information that came out that said, hey, these types of oils are probably not great for your body.
Right.
And so, the regulators took a hard look at it and said, is this information reliable? Is this information good? And is this going to harm people? And they took a hard stance on it. And my favorite chips no longer taste like my favorite chips anymore. And it's very sad. But it's something that is important, I think, for us to take second looks at things like that, just because it tastes amazing.
Yeah. I miss those chips.
Just because it tastes amazing.
I think this is maybe where the layperson gets frustrated with the academic world, is where, like, we'll use COVID. Don't do this. A month later, this one's okay. Wait, don't do it again. Like, there was this constant, I won't say constant, but there was change. We would get an announcement, this is bad, and then you know what, we're wrong, it's not that bad, and then they would switch. Maybe explain just a little bit that science is evolving. Like, we're figuring, literally, this was the best information we had, and now it's not. We've learned something else. What's your take on, like, that process? I guess we mentioned a little bit with the second look at food, but mention that.
Yeah. I think one of the hardest things that happened with COVID is that the public saw science happen in real time. And it was like hugely under a microscope, right? There was, maybe this will work. No, that doesn't work. Oh, maybe this will work.
Right.
And because we were all dealing with this at the same time, the whole world was dealing with this. We all had a microscope on every little thing. And hypotheses and testing hypotheses and doing rigorous trials and things like that take time. And it was time we didn't have. Mm-hmm. And so they were like, okay, let's just try it and see what happens with things. And it unfortunately had a lot of misinformation come out because of that. Right. Scientists have to make recommendations with the best available information they have at that moment.
Right.
That information could change tomorrow with a new publication or with new information that comes out. And when it does, science doesn't stay static. Science doesn't say, that new information challenges my belief, I'm not going to change my belief.
Right.
No.
That's important, right?
This new information, so I have to consider that. And how does that affect my belief? Right. And do I believe something different now because of that new information? And when COVID happened, we were seeing that happen in real time, where we were like, we don't think this is airborne. Masks probably wouldn't help, as the example, right? Because everybody thinks about that one. Masks won't help. Well, part of that was probably we don't want to run on masks because our first responders need them. Right. And we probably have supply chain issues at that point. The other part is, maybe we don't have enough information to say that they work effectively. So we're not going to have a run on masks when we don't know if they even work. Right. Or we think maybe they won't work because maybe it's not airborne. And then as it evolved, it was, this is very clearly in respiratory droplets, maybe social distancing will work, so we won't have a run on masks. Look, new data. It's even worse than we thought. Maybe we need to mask. And then you see, masks being delivered to homes. And and then you see the run on masks, and you saw the supply chain issues we had with masks and people creating their own at home, which was amazing, and sharing them with friends just so that we could all get through it. But the changing, it's frustrating in science that the new information has to change your belief, but it has to.
Is that the normal flow of science? We just saw it. Is that so? You're saying you're constantly going, yep, no, yeah, no, and then normally you wouldn't release it until the end of the study, right? Well, this one was like, hey, that's happening right now. So that is what science is, right? We think this is going on, so we test it. It is or it isn't. We keep moving. That's the science, right?
Yeah. So every day, the people in the laboratories are saying, what do I think happens in this, specific pathway or for this specific disease? And then you test it. You do this test, and you bring all those tests together and say, oh, crud, this one piece of information, it's very repeatable. I've repeated it 3 times and it doesn't fit. So how do I change my point of view to try to fit that piece in as well? Because sometimes you'll have everything in a line and everything looks right except for this one little piece of information. But that little piece of information might be completely turn your hypothesis on its head.
Right.
But you have to find a way to incorporate it. And yeah, we don't see that typically. That's typically happening behind the scenes, because eventually you bring it to a story and then you have your story and then you publish your story with all your evidence to back up your chain of thought, your thinking behind each piece. And then it gets reviewed by other scientists and they poke holes in it.
Right.
And then you have to do some more studies to beef it up and make it even better. And then you finally publish it. And that takes years sometimes. But then in a situation like COVID, everything's happening so quickly and having to move quickly because we're all experiencing it at the same time. And so I'm sitting back going, okay, we'll see tomorrow.
Right.
For most of it, and just waiting to see some of the science come out, because before I freak out, right? At first I was like, okay, the science isn't really there to make me worry.
Right.
And then as it evolved, I'm like, okay, we need to start caring about this. We need to start worrying about this.
Right.
And I think I was hopefully you saw it. I was pretty honest with my friends.
Yeah.
I'm like, at this point, I'm not worried. And then I'm like, okay, now we need to start really caring about this and worrying about this because the science is there.
Right.
And then, okay, I'm masking. Why am I masking? To protect everybody around me.
Right.
And the idea of, providing barriers and all of that, as things evolve. But yeah, it happened real time and everybody got to see it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's dirty. It's messy. Science is not that clean.
Right. I agree. And I think one of the things we're not good as humans is assessing risk and making decisions based on risk. Like, I feel like I'm better than average and I still fail at it, but it makes me laugh. I see somebody in their car by themselves with a mask on, and I know they're poor at risk assessment because they're not wearing a helmet. Because if they were worried about risks of dying, them getting in a car accident currently is way higher of them dying of COVID in a car by themselves. Like, I know that. And I think we're bad at assessing the risk. But you did that. You said, hey, the data I see doesn't worry me. And then all of a sudden you're like, you know what? The data that I see worries me. And these are the steps, the logical steps that I'm going to take. And I think that's valid that we all try to do that. Try to think through a problem that we see and what is a valid and reasonable. What can I actually do? Because we could have all stayed inside till today, 3 years later. That would have prevented any of us from getting COVID, but we would have starved because we didn't go to work. And I think you have to have some logical, thoughts about that. So I've got 3 more questions, and then we'll get going. Artificial sweeteners. Should we worry about them?
Artificial sweeteners.
Yeah, stuff in the Diet
so
Coke.
I think there's a lot of information about artificial sweeteners generally out there in the world. There's new studies that kind of pop up here and there, linking them to different disorders and things like that. I will say generally the amount of artificial sweetener that you'd have to consume to have any sort of problems whatsoever at this point is ridiculously high. So one great example a lot of people talk about is aspartame, right? It's in Diet Coke, it's in Coke Zero, it's in a bunch of other things. And the amount that you'd ever have to consume to have an issue is 18 to 20 cans of pop a day. So the actual risk from an individual can or 2 per day is not going to be substantial.
Gotcha.
Your body's going to process it. It's going to go away. But if you're drinking 18 to 20 cans of pop per day, you're probably going to have other issues before you even get to an issue with aspartame.
Yeah.
So there's little things like that. I know, some other ones, stevia, people are like, it's amazing. It's the best thing ever. And then we're like, maybe not. Right. It might convert to something else in your body that might be bad for you. Right. So there's a lot of give and take on these things. And really it's about moderation, right? All things in moderation.
Right.
And, if you deal with things in moderation and you have a little bit here and there, and it's not, the only thing you're drinking ever, and you're not, or only thing you're eating ever, you're probably going to be fine.
Right.
But I preach moderation to everybody, because I think, people, let's have a couple cans per day. Let's not go to 18 to 20.
Right. You don't have a 24 pack per day is probably not a good habit.
Probably not.
Well, and I think that probably goes to, there are also things that we're talking about poisons and toxins, but in general, like I mentioned, food additives, you know how you don't have to worry about if red is bad for you, red 40 or whatever the number is? Eat natural foods that don't have ingredients. Like that is that would be more healthy, right? Just eat fruits and vegetables and meat. And if I had a mom, if you pulled it out of the ground, eat that. And then maybe every now and then have an Oreo, and who cares what's in it, right? Like it's, like you said, it's moderation, and it's health versus poison. Like there is some other factors to consider when you're worried about the additives in your food. You could just eat food that doesn't have additives, that are whole products.
If you're very concerned about it, and it's something that's very concerning in your life, the stress that you're getting thinking about it is probably worse for your health than actually eating it.
Right. Now that's a good point. And
I will say, a lot of people preach, just eat natural, just eat. There's a lot of things that are natural that can kill you.
Right.
Formaldehyde, it's a cancer-causing agent, but there's a lot of formaldehyde in the pear. You eat a pear, a very natural, happy, healthy pear.
Right.
And you get formaldehyde. Your body produces formaldehyde naturally. So really, with all things, it's the dose makes the poison. You drink water. Water is a toxin. You inhale water, you will drown.
Yeah.
You drink too much water, right, your body will, go into shock, and you will potentially die if you drink too much in too short of a period of time. Water is a toxin. Literally everything's a toxin. So really it's about how much of it are you consuming, and, having a very diverse plate is a great thing. Having a lot of fresh vegetables if you can get them. But unfortunately, a lot of areas in the United States don't have access to those things. So a lot of people demonize food and demonize processed food. I get it. It would be great if we could all eat very unprocessed food. It would probably be better for us all.
Yeah.
But there are areas in the United States where people don't have access to that. Yeah. And I think it's kind of a pet peeve of mine when people demonize food, mm-hmm, when people are just trying to feed their kids.
Right.
And that's all they have access to. And maybe that's all they can afford.
Yeah, for sure.
And they're just trying to do their best. And, I think do what you can for your family. As long as your family is fed and happy, I think that's the most important thing. Now, should you eat a whole bunch of Oreo cookies and a whole bunch of sugar, right, all at once? Probably not. Spread it out. Right. A cookie a day is not going to hurt you.
Right.
But if you don't have access, and all you can eat is like canned soup or something like that, do what you need to for your family, and your family's going to be okay.
Right.
Because we do have really high regulation in this country. So the foods that are on our shelf are as safe as we can make them with the current science available. Mm-hmm. Whether they come in a plastic package or a can, whether they come, sitting on a shelf, a pear. We're trying our best, but occasionally you get things that come up. I say one thing, like arsenic in baby food, right? The baby rice, the rice cereal that they had. There was a huge to-do when my son was little about arsenic in the rice cereal. So what do? We moved to the oatmeal cereal. But it's all from natural sources, because rice just has a high level of arsenic to begin with. Right. It comes from the soil. And so maybe you don't want to feed your baby a whole bunch of that, maybe a little bit of that with other stuff.
Right.
In putting out that information as it gets put out, you can bank on that being the best available science that we have at the time. And our opinion may evolve. Right. Maybe the arsenic in the soil comes down. Right. Maybe it goes up and we're just like, no, don't eat it at all.
Right.
But those things are being watched, and we're doing the best that we can for our families. And I think food deserts exist. And I think that's a very important thing for people to remember, especially when they put out information on social media, because it can feel very judgy and very much a place of privilege. Coming from somebody who, my parents didn't have a lot when I was growing up. And so maybe that 25-cent box of mac and cheese, from VG's, right. all we could afford at the time. They couldn't make their own pasta and put their own cheese in there and like do that, all of that, just because we couldn't afford it.
Right.
But they did the best that they could with what they had. And, just a healthy, well-rounded, give me a can of green beans with the mac and cheese. Make sure it's all well-rounded and
I think
all things in moderation.
That's excellent. All right, I've got 2 more things for yes or no. These came from my wife. She was very not concerned. She was curious. The chemicals in sunscreen, should we be worried about it?
So I think people see it as your skin is your biggest organ, right? And your skin does absorb some things. Right. I would say there's some things that might be more worrisome. I think those have been taken off the market, or information has been put out there to say, hey, you probably shouldn't use these. I would look at information from sources like FDA or CDC and see, what's reasonable. But generally speaking, the stuff that's out there is not going to hurt you.
The stuff that's on nonstick cooking pans, like Teflon and...
Oh, the Teflon. I would say, I don't know enough about that, but generally speaking, I would say as long as it's not like flaking off,
right,
you're not really going to have a problem.
Gotcha. That's fair. Don't eat the chips.
Yeah, like if you've got scratches on your pan, you might want to get a new pan.
Gotcha. I like it.
You don't want it flaking off into your food.
That's good. All right, Mary, is there anything I didn't ask you that you'd like to share with the guys listening? Things that we should worry about, or maybe just one last parting words of wisdom from an extremely intelligent person?
I would just say, if you have concerns about things that are health related in any way, find a physician that you trust, for yourself, for your kids, and ask them the questions. Don't be afraid, because most physicians will have that conversation with you if they're a reasonable person. Mm-hmm. If they're not, maybe find a new physician. If they're not willing to answer those questions, because that's part of their job, is to help you understand and help you feel more confident about your health and what you're getting, whether it be vaccines or GMOs or any of this stuff. A good physician will sit down and speak with you about it if you have concerns, because they don't want you to be stressing about it and they don't want you to be afraid. I think generally scientists really want to put forward the idea of facts, not right. fear. Mm-hmm. And I think fear in our lives is something that we just really need to try to get over and get past. And the best way to do that is to inform yourselves as best you can. Yeah. With good sources, for sure. With people that are reasonable and reliable. And I think your own personal physician, you can create that relationship. They'll know your health background mm-hmm. or your kid's health background and be able to inform you for your particular situation. And I think that's something really important.
One thing I've done with my doctor is ask him, what did you do for your kids? There's I probably don't want to get into it because I think this is a pretty sensitive topic, but the vaccines. I asked my physician, what did you give to your kids and when? And I listened to his reasoning and his thoughts. And I don't think most parents love their kids more than anything on this earth and aren't going to intentionally do something that's damaging. And so that's what I got from him. What did you give your kids? Why did you do it? When did you do it? If your kid had this, would you give them antibiotics? And some say, yeah. And find someone you trust. I think that's really important. So, Mary, I thank you so much. This is very good. I appreciate it. Guys, if you're listening, have an open mind towards science and maybe a little more critical thinking. Have conversations with your doctor. I think this is important. Remember, you need to earn your title every day. This has been Danny Dumas, and I will talk to you later. Bye.